Dr. Lambda was nervous. He had spent his entire life working for this moment. It would be the moment that made him, or the moment that failed him. Ever since he was 7 years old, he wanted to put a man on Mars. He originally envisioned himself, but a slew of health complications ensured that he would remain on terra firma while his colleagues would voyage past the stratosphere and into the heavens. Unlike those who venture, however, Lambda had already been to Mars. It was his earliest memory, but one of his most vivid. He remembered stepping out of the craft, his bare feet making prints in the crimson sand, the sun casting the world in a vermilion haze. He was led by strange, friendly creatures out of the craft and across the desert. These creatures were the very same who walked slowly into his room late one night and offered him their hand. He did not complain. He was too fascinated with his surroundings, too preoccupied with the new formation of the same stars that had dotted the sky. He was on Mars. He knew it, even then. The figures led him to a large red rock, and waited. The creatures were tall, humanoid, and clothed in robes of heliotrope, emerald, fuchsia, and white. There was no discernible difference in sex between them. However, some of the figures had tails, and others did not. They had a strange, androgynous look to them, and their faces were more human than Lambda would have expected, even at that age. They waited, still. The mountains on the horizon loomed over them. In the far distance, Lambda could make out what he thought was Olympus Mons. He must have been 100 miles or more from it, but it still appeared colossal, a great shape standing tall and proud, conquering his view. A slight breeze picked up and swirled red sand around Lambda's feet. He shivered. All the wonder at his location had made him forget he was in no more than his nightclothes. One of the creatures produced a small, fabric square from inside its sleeve, and passed it to him with a loving smile. Lambda looked at it. He looked back at the creature, who nodded at him, still smiling. At once, Lambda knew what to do. He placed the square on his chest, and from it, more fabric began to unfurl. The square could have been no bigger than 2 square inches, but more and more fabric unwound from it, and before long he was enveloped in the same robe that adorned the kindly creatures. It was warm, very warm, and comfortable in the extreme. He looked down, and the robe was the perfect size for him. It was adorned with the same colours as the creatures, and was filled with myriad pockets containing things he thought it best not to fiddle with. After what felt close to an hour, a deep, underground rumble shook Lambda and the creatures, and the rock they had stopped in front of had begun to very slowly split open. It hummed deeply as it opened, and a bright white light shone from within, casting an impossibly tall pillar of light sprouting from within. Briefly following the light came a silver, gleaming platform. The creatures beckoned for Lambda to step on it, and he complied. The creatures followed, and the platform sank slowly, back within the dimensions of the rock. The ride down would be as long as the wait on the surface, he surmised. He didn't mind. The fact that he was standing on an alien planet with an intelligent, kindly race was more than enough for him to focus on presently. He must have been lost in thought, because the ride was over before long. He descended into a great, glittering hall, populated by innumerable figures walking hither and thither throughout the space. He had to gasp. In all his dreams, in all the science he had studied so far in his short 7 years on his own tiny planet, after all the reading, writing, and theorizing, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. Thinking back now, there was nothing that special about the society. Indeed, it was incredibly similar to Earth's. There were clear roles that each citizen fit into, seemingly by choice. There were myriad different clothes, body inks, hairstyles, and more. It begged the question, where did the Earthlings come from? Perhaps we were descended from these beings, cast out millennia ago for reasons hitherto unknown. After the slow ride down to the bottom, the creatures stepped off the platform, and Lambda quickly followed. They walked through a doorway roughly 35 meters from the platform. The edge of the doorway was a deep, sparkling blue. He deduced it was probably hewn out of some kind of mineral. The tunnel was fully made of this mineral on the inside, and was empty. The creatures and Lambda walked down the tunnel for roughly 25 minutes, All the while Lambda was losing himself in the glittering ocean that surrounded them. They reached a bend, and followed it along. At the end of the tunnel, a great white door was slowly growing in size in front of them as they walked. As they got closer, the door seemed not to be a door at all, at least not in the traditional sense. It was revealed to him that the door was actually a giant slab of glittering metal, polished to a mirror. He could not guess what metal it was. It was more than likely some strange Martian metal he had not encountered before, nor had anyone from his home world. It seemed to him like platinum, but that was just from what he saw. The creatures and Lambda stopped outside the door, and the creature who'd been leading them placed a 6-fingered hand upon it. The door glowed for a brief second, then slowly rumbled open from the bottom, sliding up. When the door was open, Lambda expected the creatures to walk in, and for him to follow. They remained still. After a short while, the creatures beckoned him in with a smile. He slowly passed through the arch of the door, and it rumbled shut behind him. He felt a tinge of panic as it closed. What if something was wrong? What if these creatures wanted to detain him? Starve him until he gives up the secrets of Earth? No, that would not be the case. They seemed intelligent enough to have a developed society, and have clearly mastered space travel. They would know that a child of 7 would hold no secrets of anything, except perhaps the location of the cookie jar. Maybe they intended to sacrifice him, to give his flesh to the mad, tentacled god that lurked in the bowels of the planet. He was being coerced with kindness to march to his doom, and the citizens would reap the reward of a successful harvest. This seemed more plausible, and the seed of anxiety began to take root in his mind. He started to panic, terrified he was about to be torn to shreds by some unknowable, non-Euclidean mass of squirming shapes, to be broken down and consumed, to be nothing more than a meal. He stopped walking and began to sniffle. His eyes were growing wetter, and were close to overflowing when a voice echoed through the endless whiteness of the room. "What troubles you, little one?" Lambda was stunned. In all of his time with the creatures, he had not heard utter of any kind of noise at all, never mind speech. They had seemed to breathe, but the motion carried with it no sound, no matter how hard he listened. To hear them speak English was astounding. "Do not fear, child. You will not be harmed. Follow my voice. We must speak." Lambda began to calm down. The soothing nature of the voice calmed him greatly. He followed the sound, and before long came upon a large desk, with a creature sitting at one side, and an empty chair at the other. The table and chairs seemed to be made of the same mirror-shine metal as the door, and the table was strewn with various papers, all inked with an iridescent gold fluid, in a language he did not recognize. "Please sit, child," the sitting figure said. Lambda did so. The chair, despite seemingly being made from one giant piece of metal, was shockingly comfortable, and his tiredness suddenly caught up with him. His eyes began to get heavy, but he could not quite drift off. The voice kept him tethered to the waking world. "Greetings." "Hello. My name is Jack Lambda." His voice was groggy. "We have brought you here for a reason, Jack Lambda. We need your help." "My help? What can I do? I'm a 7-year-old boy." "You may be now, but one day, Jack Lambda, you will rise to become one of the most treasured minds of your people. You, and you alone, shall usher in a new age of interplanetary community and love. You are the herald of Earth-Mars relations." How do you know?" "We have seen it, in the glimmer. We have also seen the foe. Forgive me for sounding dramatic, but we have seen the ones we call the id, riding their pale octopi and condemning both our worlds to slaughter and slavery. Only if we communicate and join forces do we stand a chance of saving our ways of life." Lambda said nothing. The whole thing sounded a bit silly, he thought. His eyes and every part of his body told him he was indeed on Mars, but all of a sudden this prophecy seemed a bit much. The id, What kind of a name was that? It sounded like something from Doctor Who. Another thought crossed his mind. How can you speak English? The creature chuckled. Oh, sweet child, your species and ours are not too far from each other. We are capable of making the same basic sounds as you, and we have been to Earth many times. We have learned the language to a native degree, as with all Earth languages. Lambda nodded. You may be wondering why it is you specifically that is sat here, and not some other child, or even a world leader, or a brilliant scientist. As I said, we have simply seen you. You are the one to bridge the gap between our world and yours. We cannot simply land on your world and announce ourselves. As much as we love you, we fear that retaliation and violence may stem from it. We consulted the Glimmer, and it showed us you. Lambda did not want to argue. If he truly was an emissary of his home world, he wanted to make a good impression. What must I do? Nothing. For now. When you reach maturity, you must dedicate your life to the sciences. You must be the one that spearheads the project that will put the first man on Mars. We shall take care of the rest. Lambda's eyes were getting heavy again. It was inevitable that he would fall asleep. I understand you are tired, child. We will meet again, but only through voice, and in many years. Sleep now, and begin your work when you are ready. May Allah be with you. Lambda's eyes fell shut, then jerked open. He was back in his room, swathed in the darkness. He was in his pyjamas, and 5 hours had passed, judging from the clock on his bedside table. For some they would take it for a dream, but for some reason he could not quite pin down, Lambda believed all that happened was real. He knew he would have to be the one to put man on Mars. He snapped out of his memory and back to reality. The module Ventus was slowly orbiting Mars and getting ready for entry. He tensed and spoke into the microphone. Corporal Tithe, if you can hear me, you're clear to begin entry. Whenever you're ready. Roger that, Dr. Lambda. The voice on the other end crackled back. The module began to descend. The control room was silent. It started slow, drifting into the furthest reaches of the thermosphere, but before long was barreling through each layer of Mars's atmosphere with awesome speed. The module began to heat up, to catch fire. It stayed in one piece miraculously. Before long, the window in which to deploy the parachute and retro boosters came, and Lambda's stomach knotted. Please, for the love of God, deploy your chute! Tithe had 20 seconds to deploy, or he would crash into the Martian desert, destroying the module and all 8 crew members inside with it. 20 became 15. 15 became 12, and his heart dropped. He had failed. Then, a notification blipped on the screen. Parachute and booster deployment successful. Lambda looked back at the monitor and saw that the module was gliding gracefully to the surface. After roughly 10 minutes, it landed. The room was beyond silent. If someone thought, you would be able to hear it. An eternity passed. Longer than an eternity. Nothing but silence. The world had stopped. Mission Control, this is Corporal Tithe. Successful landing. Repeat, successful landing. All instruments functioning normally, and module intact and undamaged. Preparing for disembarkation. The room exploded. Cheers, tears, screams, kisses, songs, whoops. They had done it. No, he had done it. He had fulfilled his promise that he made so many years ago. He had bridged the gap between man and Mars. He realized he was crying. His eyes were overflowing, and his vision became blurry with joy and relief. He sat down, and as he looked around at his colleagues popping open champagne bottles and throwing confetti everywhere, his heart began to ache. He realized all too quickly that it ached for real, not just out of emotion. He smiled a deep, thankful smile and closed his eyes. His work was done. It was up to the Martians now. And the story ends there. You've been listening to Frontier Fiction. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, in the depths of space, there's always another story to be told.